Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. Here on the show, we bring you the right information to empower you. The MSME entrepreneur tonight on the show on the Crux. I'm bringing you a special conversation with Whitney Johnson. She's the founder and CEO of WLG Advisors. I caught up with her to understand how global entrepreneurs approach innovation and also what she has by way of advice for Indian entrepreneurs on strategy and hiring right. Here's what she had to say. Thank you so much for speaking with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start by first and foremost, and I found this very interesting, in the masterclass that you did for our MSMEs, you said companies are not the ones who are disrupting, companies are not the ones that are eventually going to do the disruption, but it's the people of the companies who are going to disrupt, the people who are going to be involved in that disruption. My question to you is how perhaps companies should ensure that they are keeping pace with these changes that are happening. How can more companies say that my employees need to think like innovators? I need to change to ensure that I'm giving them also the platform to do that.
Well, a great place to start is oftentimes when people have gotten to the point where they want to try something new, the tendency to say, I want that job, or I want that job, or I want that job. One of the ways you can really get people to thinking like an innovator is to say to them, well, those jobs aren't necessarily available. They're taken by someone else. But I want you to really think about what are some problems that you think our company needs to solve, or some problems that are not being solved, and are those problems that you can solve? And if you can go out and create a business case for me about why we need to go after that, and it will generate 5 times the income of what I'm actually paying you, then that's a way for them to create an opportunity for themselves, because now there's a job, they've created the job, they've created the opportunity, but in the process of finding something for themselves to do, they've actually just now innovated for the company. So one of the best ways for people to innovate is just to figure out a problem that they think they want to solve, make the case for why the company needs to solve it, and then if you're the right kind of manager, you'll say, okay, you made the case, let's try it and see what happens. And that, I think, is the best way for a company to remain innovative.
All right, let's talk about entrepreneurship. It's clearly the flavor as far as India is concerned. And my first question to you is how, given that you have a global perspective, how are companies ensuring that they're hiring right? What should a company keep in mind when it comes to hiring right? Because that is half the battle won.
It is a big question. I think one of the things that we do sometimes is we're looking to hire people, and we hire people who are already expert at what they know how to do. And because we're hiring an expert, not necessarily, when I say expert, they can have domain expertise, but they're at the top of a learning curve. They figured out how to do something. And so now you're going to hire them, they're going to come in, and you might get them to be there for 6 months or a year, and then they're going to be bored. They figured out how to navigate things internally, but now they're done. And so one of the ways that you can hire to retain people, hire people who are excited about being there, hire people who are going to be willing to innovate, is hire people who are at the bottom of their learning curve. They've got some expertise, but not all the expertise that they need. And in the process of them figuring out how to do their job, they're going to also innovate on behalf of your company. And by the way, you're going to be a boss that they want to work for because you gave them a shot when other people didn't. And there's going to be tremendous loyalty that comes as well. And with that loyalty, engagement, happiness, they become a brand ambassador for your organization.
One thing that we don't talk about enough, unfortunately, is culture, and how you ensure that, at least for small businesses, for entrepreneurs who are running small businesses, that the culture that you have of the leader is something that's also percolating down, that you're ensuring that the culture is something that everyone is adhering to. How do you do that?
It's a great question. It's interesting. I think it certainly starts with the leader. I remember hearing Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford, saying that once you become a leader, once you become the CEO of a company, your face isn't yours anymore. I thought that was really powerful, is that everything you say, every look, every move you make is interpreted by everybody in the organization. And so one of the first ways that you create a culture that is safe for people is you can never, first of all, you have to kind of keep some of your emotions to yourself. You have to share those emotions, but not with the people who work for you. And you can also never say something bad about anybody you work with. And when you're running small businesses in particular, and there's this familial feel, there's a temptation you're having a bad day and you're frustrated with what that person did. And so you start wanting to say, well, so-and-so did that, and you kind of get snarky. And yet, if you do that, they'll believe that someday you're going to say the same thing about them. And so I think that's one of the most important ways is you can create a culture. It's number one is recognize that everybody's interpreting everything you do, and to have a code that you simply cannot talk badly about someone. And if you are frustrated, then you've got to find a place to do it, either with your family, but not too much, or with a coach, but someone where is a safe place to do it. And you can have those feelings, but they don't get amplified in a way that's destructive to the culture.
We were talking about hiring, right? And I want to talk to you about attrition. Attrition in India is something that's very closely watched, particularly in the tech industry, which keeps a very close eye on attrition. Data shows that India, over the years, has had the highest attrition when it comes to its closest peers in APAC. For 2018, we're at about 14% compared to our nearest competitor, our nearest country, which is at about 11%. But you argue that attrition isn't necessarily a bad thing. Why is that?
If you have people who are learning and growing, and then their sweet spot, and they're getting picked off because you're not giving them opportunities to do more growing and learning, that's the bad kind. If you've got people who are at the top of a learning curve, who have mastered everything they know how to do, and they're bored and they're not contributing anymore, then you want them to leave. But the problem is those are the people who stay, and the people who are really good at what they're doing are the ones who leave. And so what I would say is to manage those high potentials, those people that you're like, oh, it's going to kill me if they leave. You've got to find a way to stretch them, to give them assignments where there's a real risk of a failure, but also make it safe for them to fail. And at the same time, to appreciate them, to say thank you for the good work that you're doing. And I think too often when people are doing a good job, we just kind of leave them alone and forget people need to be acknowledged for their good work.
On the Leaders of Tomorrow, we do a lot of interviews with women entrepreneurs. My question to you, as someone who's based in the US and so closely associated with businesses there, in India, if you look at the data of women who are involved in the workforce, it's lower than some sub-Saharan countries. There aren't enough women who move up the ladder here in India when it comes to corporate India. What's it like in the US? And perhaps using that experience to talk to our viewers about how more women can be encouraged to not just join the workforce, but stay in the workforce.
Yeah. So it is better in the United States than it is here. And certainly it is better in the United States today than it was 30 years ago if I interview my mother and ask her about her experience. But we still have a long way to go. What I would say is when women aren't able to move up, there are going to be some things that they need to do to improve and to hone their skills. But there's also research that has shown that women have to be 2.5 times more competent than men in order to be on equal footing. And so to recognize that there's some ecosystem situations or issues that you've got to deal with. I think one of the things that we can do if we really want to bring women along is it's going to involve men. And because oftentimes what will happen is you find a woman who's really high-powered and she's got a lot of potential, and this has happened to me so many times, where I'll meet a man and he'll be like, you're fantastic. I want you to meet this other fantastic woman that I know. And I'm like, wait a second, that's not going to help, because you probably have a network of 100 people, and 10 of them are women, and 90 of them are men. What I need are sponsors. I don't need mentors, I need sponsors. And what do I mean by sponsors? Someone like a Marshall Goldsmith has been a sponsor for me, where it's not just, hey, you're nice, you're awesome, go get them. It's, hey, you're awesome, I'm speaking here, I want you to come speak with me, and I want you to have a seat at the table, and you deserve to be here. And so part of what's going to have to happen, I believe, for women in India, in the United States, everywhere, we need men who are saying, I want to bring women along, I'm not sure how to do it, is to say, come, sit at that table, talk, you've got something to offer, and by the way, I've got your back because I'm your sponsor.
Okay, so you're saying sponsor, not necessarily a mentor, but I want to talk about networking as well. Multiple research studies have shown that women perhaps are not as good at networking as compared to their male counterparts. Perhaps one or two things that have helped you in your own journey that you can leave our viewers with as a tip to say, this is perhaps how you should be networking.
That's really interesting. So I had never heard that. What I would say is I think that women are really good at networking. I think probably the research, having not seen it, is that women aren't able to network into the right networks. So to get into the networks that they need to be to get stuff done, where so much of informal things are happening. And so what I would argue is, number one is women need sponsors, number one. And number two is, from a networking standpoint, I think part of what happens is that when women are trying to do business with other people, there's a sense that a woman, if she's giving something to someone else, that's just a feminine thing to do, but she's not actually transacting. And so part of what I think women have to do is find a way to have language when we're talking to other people in a business context. We're not just saying, oh, that would be fun to help you. And they're like, oh, that would be wonderful. You can help me, because that's what women do. They help, is to be able to have language of saying something like, you know, this is so interesting. I would love to explore working with you on this. And so you're changing that language, and then you're able to start putting yourself into a network where you're able to do business with people, as opposed to be the helper who moves other things along.
Time for a break. On the other side, more food for thought with a strategy and management guru and author, Whitney Johnson. That's on the other side. Just stay tuned. You're back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and tonight on the show, we're bringing you thoughts and takeaways from a conversation that I did with Whitney Johnson. She meets very regularly with small businesses, advising them on strategy and innovation. I spoke to her just shortly after announcing the launch of Season 7 of the Leaders of Tomorrow. Here's what she had to say. You were talking about the ecosystem previously. I just want to go back to that and talk about the role of the government when it comes to encouraging entrepreneurship. Here in India, the government, particularly where tech is involved, has come up with a regulatory framework, but the direct involvement as far as day-to-day running of businesses, etc., that's something that entrepreneurs argue for on both sides, saying that, yes, you need more government involvement, and no, you don't. It should best be left at a hands-off approach. Your view on perhaps what is the best framework to have as far as the government is concerned when it comes to encouraging entrepreneurs?
Well, first of all, it's not something I've thought a ton about. But what I would say is that in any situation, I think individuals need to believe that it's all up to them to make it happen. I believe that we have to believe that we were made to act and not be acted upon, and not rely on the government. So if you can't get help from the government, you want them just to stay out of the way and let you do your job. In the meantime, I think there are things that the government can do in terms of providing funding to women-owned businesses, for example. But in my experience in the United States, where things are really effective is where you have accelerators, where you have incubators for business, where you have resources where people can get advice, they can get capital, they can get access to experts that they need. And so to the extent that the government can fund those types of institutions or organizations, I think that's probably the most helpful, because then they're funding an ecosystem that they then is expert in helping you get done what you want to do in terms of your business taking off.
Okay, let's talk innovation. And innovation is a big word, but I'm going to attempt to drill it down into a couple of things. First and foremost, even some of the biggest companies here in India tell us that their shareholders don't understand that they're investing into R&D and therefore innovation, and that at the end of the day, it's a question of ROI. Have you ever had that question thrown at you? How do you sort of then tell entrepreneurs that, yes, it's necessary to invest into innovation and R&D perhaps, because that's what is going to hold you in the long run?
Well, I mean, it's part of the reason why I think it's important, if possible, as a small and medium-sized business owner, is to be willing to bootstrap your business, to self-fund it. Because when you're willing to self-fund, a couple of things happen. Number one is you are very impatient for profits, because if you don't have profits, you're going to go out of the business. And also, the other thing is then you prioritize, you make decisions, you make choices. You can have too much money. You can have too many resources and you're really in trouble. And so when you self-fund, what happens is that you're not accountable to investors. It's a matter of, are you focused short-term, long-term? When you bootstrap, you can be long-term. If you've got the right investors, you can be long-term, but I would really recommend that people bootstrap as long as possible so that you're making the right strategic decisions for your investment.
What do you think is going to take India into being an investment and a startup hub like we see in Silicon Valley or Israel? One or two things that you think should necessarily change before we can reach that?
I think it takes people, individuals. I'm always going to come back to the individual. It's not the companies, it's the people. It takes individuals. It takes rooms like we've been in today where people decide, I'm going to do something. I'm going to invest. I'm going to bring a group of people together. We're going to invest because we know there's a contagion effect. When people have colds, then other people get colds. When people are willing to invest and then they make some people rich, then other people are rich. And so what I would say to anybody who's listening to this today is go out and invest for yourself. Get as rich as you possibly can, because one of the beautiful things about money is it allows you to extend your ability to do good far beyond your physical presence. So go out, be successful as a business owner, take that money, invest in other businesses, make it possible for other people to grow, and that's where you start.
All right, that's a very interesting point of view. I want to talk about also innovation, and given that you have a global view really, and you have an America-centric view as far as innovation is concerned. My question to you is whether, in your opinion, entrepreneurs in countries like India should perhaps look at innovating for India, not necessarily innovating perhaps for the globe? Or do you think that both can happen? That we can also have, say, an Alibaba in India, which can go global? Or should we, given our realities, possibly just look at innovating for India?
If India, or any country for that matter, would focus on what are the problems that we need to solve here today and focus on solving those problems, I think that you will discover, and we will all discover, that some pretty grand innovations will come from that. Part of the problem I think is happening is that India, in this instance, is comparing itself to the United States. And we don't ever do very well when we try to compare ourselves, because this is a magnificent country.
We also love talking about the role that celebrating failures perhaps have in an entrepreneur's life cycle. What role do you think it has?
Well, failure is really tough. And I know we talk about celebrating failure, but I don't think we really mean it. We mean celebrate my failure, but I'm certainly not going to celebrate your failure. And part of the reason it's so difficult for us is that we tie our identity to our successes or failures, meaning part of what the task, I think, for many of us, actually all of us as individuals, is to learn how to separate out what we do from who we are, the essence of who we are. And part of the way you can do that is to say failure is an event, it's not a person. And then again, do that inner work of getting our sense of identity to the point where when a failure happens, actually, if you think about it, it's actually learning. Because when I get information in my head, that's just information. I actually haven't learned anything until I've taken that information, tested it, and seen what happens. We call that failure, but in fact, it's learning. So focus on your identity and then reframe what you're defining and calling failure.
Let's talk, in fact, you were saying something along the lines of the innovation dilemma. And I want to understand that, if you can explain that to our viewers.
Yeah, so the innovator's dilemma is that you are building a business, your revenue is growing, your margins are expanding, your team is humming, everything's working. And so you now know that everything is working, and yet, right at the very time that everything is working, you probably should be figuring out what's next. What next product should we build? What should we do differently? Question, how are we doing? What are we doing? What could we do better? But because margins are expanding, because everything is working, we think, I don't want to take my eye off on this because then it might stop working. And yet you know that over the long term, if you don't take your eye off on that temporarily, then you're going to be in trouble. And so the dilemma is if you innovate or if you don't innovate, you're taking a risk. And so that's the dilemma. And so part of the question is how do you solve that? There's a whole wonderful, fantastic book written on that called The Innovator's Dilemma. The work that I do is focus on that innovator's dilemma with people, where you're saying, okay, I need them right where they are doing what they've always done in order to ship a product. But if I try to continue to do that, I'm going to lose them because they're bored. And so the dilemma is, the way you solve that dilemma is you give people an opportunity to learn, because when you let them learn, you walk into that dilemma because they will become innovative, they will become more productive. And so you solve it by giving them an opportunity to learn.
You quoted Tolstoy previously, and I want to pick up another of his quotes where he said that all happy families are similar, unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And I want to apply that to the world of business and say perhaps one or two things that you think successful businesses are doing and unsuccessful businesses, or businesses that are failing, are perhaps doing, and use that to sort of talk to our viewers to say, this is perhaps what you should avoid.
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that successful businesses are doing more of is we talk about taking on the right kinds of risks. And I think you can be a successful business taking on competitive risk of saying, okay, there's that business over here and I want to compete against them. But you've got to really figure out, can I be successful in competing against them? You might be able to, you might not to. And it looks really attractive because you can scope it out. They're right there. You're gunning for them. But successful businesses who are continually successful are the ones who don't look at competitive risk. They look at market risk. They look at where no one else is playing. They look at what would it look like to go over there, and it doesn't look very fun because no one's there. No one's on the playground. I don't want to go there. I don't want to play there. And yet the data, the research shows from a disruption perspective that your odds of success are actually 6 times higher when you're willing to play where no one else is playing. It feels less risky, it feels more risky because no one's there, but in fact, it's less risky. And so businesses that are willing to compete where they can, but also look for as many opportunities as possible to compete where other people aren't competing are more likely to be successful.
Okay, Whitney, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. All right, that's our show tonight. If you have any feedback for us, here's how you get in touch. leadersoftomorrowtimesgroup.com is our email ID. On social media, reach out to us. Sunanda_J is my personal Twitter handle. You can also reach me on our official Twitter handle, LOT_ET now, or our Facebook page, Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.